On most mornings, somewhere inside Buckingham Palace, a member of the household staff could be seen walking the long, carpeted corridors, wearing a pair of the Queen's brand-new shoes. This wasn't theft, it was policy. Angela Kelly, a docker's daughter from Liverpool, a woman with no title, no fortune, and no blood connection to anyone in the building, happened to share the sovereign's shoe size. So, it fell to her to break in every new pair before the Queen ever wore them in public. Kelly describes the practice herself in her 2019 memoir. The most watched woman on earth trusted her comfort, her silhouette, and eventually her secrets to a servant. Over nearly 3 decades, that servant became something the palace had no formal job description for, not merely the Queen's dresser, but the woman who designed the core ensembles of the Diamond Jubilee, who led the fabrication of the replica christening gown now worn by every senior royal baby since 2008, and who served as the effective custodian of a wardrobe that spoke for a monarch who almost never explained herself in words. The Butlers had always kept the family's secrets. Angela Kelly kept its language, and in 2019, with the Queen's personal blessing, she became the first serving member of the royal household ever permitted to write about that language while her sovereign was still alive. This is the story of the woman who was never just staff. Mary Angela Kelly was born on November 4, 1957, in Walton, a working-class district in the north of Liverpool. Her father worked the docks, a crane driver and gatekeeper at Liverpool's Docklands, the kind of industrial labor that was already contracting by the time she was a teenager. Her mother was a nurse. 6 children, council housing on a terraced street, Roman Catholic, fiercely so, with what one profile described as strong seafaring roots and a tough work ethic passed down through the family. Liverpool in the late 1950s was a city with an acute sense of its own character. The docks were still the engine of it, even as containerization was beginning to hollow them out. It wasn't a world that produced many ladies-in-waiting or courtiers. It produced dockers' daughters who learned to sew from their mothers, who scoured the flea markets for fabric, who made their own clothes because buying new ones was a luxury they couldn't always afford. Kelly did that. By her teenage years, she was already immaculately dressed, fashioning her own clothes from whatever she could source. She inherited the craft from her mother and the work ethic from the docks. The Liverpool Echo would later describe her journey in a single compressed line. From a terraced house in Walton, where she was the daughter of a docker, to the Queen's personal assistant and dresser. Her path to the palace wasn't direct. She married, had 3 children, and by the late 1970s had moved to Germany, working in British Army catering, a hostess and waitress at a military mess. A second brief marriage followed. Then, by the late 1980s, a third, to Jim Kelly, an Irish guardsman she met in Germany. She moved from the military world to the diplomatic one, taking up work as housekeeper to Sir Christopher Malaby, the British ambassador to Germany, at his official residence in Berlin. That is where the trajectory changed. In October 1992, Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip made an official visit to Germany. Their party stayed at the British ambassador's residence. During that visit, the Queen met the woman keeping the house, a dock worker's daughter from Liverpool who mentioned, in passing, that she was thinking of returning to Britain. Not long afterward, Kelly received a call offering her a position with the royal household. She couldn't afford a new outfit for the interview at Windsor Castle. She sold her washing machine to buy one. She was offered the job. In 1994, Angela Kelly joined the royal household as an assistant dresser to the Queen. She was 36 years old. She had never worked in fashion. She had no design credentials, no couture training, no connection to the institution she was entering. She had a needle, a work ethic, and a Scouse accent she never lost. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what a dresser was in the royal household hierarchy and where that hierarchy placed people like her. The royal household operated through a formal chain of command that had changed remarkably little since the Victorian era. At its apex sat the Lord Chamberlain, who oversaw the household's ceremonial and administrative functions. Below him, the master of the household managed the domestic operations. Then came the ladies-in-waiting, aristocratic women, usually with titles, appointed to attend the monarch at official engagements. Then the private secretaries and equerries, educated, mostly military or university-trained professionals, who handled correspondence, scheduling, and the constitutional machinery of the monarchy. Then the pages, who attended the sovereign personally at formal occasions. And then, somewhere well below all of that, the dressers. A dresser's domain was the wardrobe room. At both Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle, the dressers occupied their own floor, the dressers' corridor, with their own kitchen, their own daily rhythm, their own hierarchy entirely separate from the courtiers above them. Their work was physical and intimate, caring for garments, maintaining records of what was worn on which occasion and in whose presence, packing trunks for royal tours, laying out clothes in precise order for the morning. The Queen would come to them. They didn't come to her. No dresser socialized with courtiers. No dresser was expected to advise on engagements or offer opinions on diplomatic sensitivities. The wardrobe was a domestic matter. The household's unwritten rules, passed from one generation of staff to the next, were clear on this. You served, and you made yourself invisible while doing it. The institution's deepest expectation of everyone at that level was that they would disappear into it, that the machinery of the household would absorb them so completely that no trace of individual presence would remain. This wasn't cruelty. It was the operating logic of a 2,000-year-old institution. Kelly worked alongside Peggy Hoath, who had been senior dresser for 34 years. Hoath was approaching retirement when Kelly arrived. Within approximately 3 years, Kelly had been promoted to senior dresser herself. The reasons for that speed weren't procedural, they were personal. By 2001, Kelly's title had formally expanded to personal assistant and senior dresser. Within a few years, the full designation was confirmed: personal assistant, advisor, and curator to Her Majesty the Queen, with specific responsibility for jewelry, insignias, and wardrobe. Royal Central has noted that a title of that form had never previously been given to a member of the household. The first person in history to hold it was a docker's daughter who had sold her washing machine to afford the interview. Co-designer isn't a title that appears in any official document. It's an interpretive description, a fair one, as it happens, for what her role actually involved by the time of the Diamond Jubilee. The published institutional record is unambiguous on the practical reality. The Abe Book's synopsis of her 2012 Royal Collection Trust book describes Royal couturier Angela Kelly, whose team of dressmakers and milliners spent 2 years designing and bringing to fruition the creations worn during the Jubilee year. The book was published by the Royal Collection Trust. That is, the institution's own characterization. What the designing actually involved is documented event by event. The ivory boucle coat, dress, hat, and shawl, studded with Swarovski crystals, that the Queen wore on the Spirit of Chartwell during the Thames Diamond Jubilee pageant on June 3, 2012. Designed by Kelly. The gold lame cocktail dress worn at the Diamond Jubilee concert on June 4th, inspired by a gilded statue of Victory. Designed by Kelly. The pale turquoise dress, coat, and hat embroidered with silver flowers worn at the service of Thanksgiving at St. Paul's on June 5th. Designed by Kelly. The salmon pink lace dress created for the London 2012 Olympic opening ceremony, in which the Queen appeared alongside Daniel Craig and delivered the line, "Good evening, Mr. Bond." Designed by Kelly. The primrose yellow double crepe wool coat and matching dress worn at the wedding of Prince William and Catherine Middleton in 2011, with hand-sewn beading at the neck in the shape of sun rays. Designed by Kelly. 5 of the 6 outfits on display at Hillsborough Castle during the Jubilee touring exhibition were Kelly designs. All 6 of the hats. The hat work is worth a moment. Kelly designed the shapes, trims, and colors, then worked with in-house milliner Stella McLaren, who joined Buckingham Palace in 2008 to construct them. McLaren, speaking in her first public interview decades into the job, described the creative process with precision. Kelly would scout materials wherever she could find them, including the artificial flower section of IKEA, pulling trimmings for hats that would be seen by hundreds of millions of people. When McLaren made the bright purple pom-pom hat the Queen wore for a 2018 visit, the Queen asked how she had achieved the matching pom-poms. McLaren told her she had unraveled some of the coat fabric, wetted it, and formed them by hand. The Queen said, "How clever you are." The design strategy had a logic that Kelly implemented across every outfit. The Queen wore bright, solid, monochromatic colors so she could be spotted in any crowd. This principle was articulated as the Queen's own concern. The Countess of Wessex spoke about it publicly, but Kelly was the person who researched the colors appropriate to each venue and host culture, who ensured the silhouette read at distance, who coordinated fabric against jewelry against hat in a system engineered for visibility and appropriateness simultaneously. Kelly's role also included controlling access to the Queen's commissions from outside designers entirely. She personally contacted milliner Rachel Trevor Morgan with an invitation. Trevor Morgan described simply in an interview, "I got a call from Angela Kelly, the Queen's personal assistant, asking if I would be interested in making hats for the Queen." She introduced designer Stuart Parvin to his royal appointment without initially revealing the client's identity. Parvin later told Vanity Fair, "Angela gave the Queen confidence, and the Queen was just more relaxed when Angela was there. Having Angela at a dress fitting made everything easier. It was a very special relationship. Angela had an inbuilt knowledge of what the Queen should look like from the outset, and the Queen trusted her." The Queen made the final approvals, but by the Diamond Jubilee year, the person determining what the world saw wasn't a couturier with a title and an atelier. She was a dockworker's daughter from Walton, who had learned to sew from her mother and source fabric in Liverpool flea markets. In 2004, the royal household retired the original royal christening gown. That gown had been commissioned by Queen Victoria in 1841 for the christening of her first child, Victoria, Princess Royal. Made of Spitalfields silk satin and Honiton lace by a seamstress named Janet Sutherland, it had been worn by approximately 62 royal babies in the 163 years since, including Queen Elizabeth II herself, Prince Charles, and Prince William. By the time Lady Louise Windsor was christened in it in 2004, the textile had become too fragile for further handling. The Queen judged it too delicate and ordered it retired for conservation. Then she commissioned Angela Kelly to make an exact replica. What followed was a 9-month project that Kelly documents in her 2019 memoir. Kelly and her fellow dresser Barbara Buckfield traveled to Italy to source lace, carrying the original gown with them, in Kelly's handbag, to match the patterns and textures against what the Italian lace makers could supply. They sourced additional lace to complement the Italian material. Back in Britain, in the dresser's kitchen at Buckingham Palace, they dyed the lace in strong Yorkshire tea. Kelly describes the process in her memoir. They placed each piece of lace in a small bowl filled with cool water and a tea bag, and left it for approximately 5 minutes, checking the color regularly until it matched the aged, antique appearance of the original. The Queen was shown the gown at each stage of development: the bodice, the sleeves, the skirt, the final robe, and took a close interest throughout. Craftsmen from both the UK and Italy contributed to the final object. Kelly led the project and carried out significant hands-on work throughout, but she wasn't working entirely alone. The Royal Collection Trust formally records the replica as Object RCIN 250499. Wikipedia's entry on the royal christening gown lists its designer as Janet Sutherland, original, 1841. Angela Kelly, replica, 2008. On April 19, 2008, the replica was worn for the first time at the christening of James, Viscount Severn, the Queen's youngest grandchild. Prince George wore it in 2013. Princess Charlotte in 2015, Prince Louis in 2018. Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor in 2019. A docker's daughter from Liverpool, who had learned to sew from her mother and educated herself in fabric at flea markets, made the garment in which the heirs to the British throne are baptized into the Church of England. The original was now behind glass. The one that mattered, the one carried to the font at Windsor Castle, at Sandringham, at the Chapel Royal, was hers. The 1953 coronation gown, designed by Norman Hartnell and embroidered with the emblems of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth in gold and silver silk thread, is housed in a climate-controlled vault at Buckingham Palace. It comes out only for major exhibitions. We know this because it appears that way in the record of every major public display of the Queen's wardrobe. What no public document has established is precisely who held authority over the vault's contents, who decided what left it and on what terms, or what the exact access protocols were. That information has never been released. What the evidence does show is the following. By the end of Kelly's tenure, the wardrobe rooms at both Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle were her operational domain. She had personal responsibility for the Queen's jewelry and insignia. Garments were stored, according to the available record, in acid-free boxes in climate-controlled conditions, maintained against daylight, temperature fluctuation, and moths. Sir Andrew Ford, a former comptroller of the royal household, recalled in a Vanity Fair interview walking into his office one day to find Kelly in discussion with him while wearing a set of the Queen's pearls, which the Queen permitted, he explained, because pearls need contact with skin to prevent yellowing. The night before the state opening of Parliament, the Queen wore the imperial state crown at her desk to accustom herself to its weight. "It's very heavy, you know," she told Ford. These details of wardrobe management, who wore what, when, for what functional reason, resided in Kelly. In 2016, the Royal Collection Trust staged Fashioning a Reign, 90 Years of Style from the Queen's Wardrobe, across 3 royal palaces, Holyrood House, Buckingham Palace, and Windsor Castle, to mark the Queen's 90th birthday. Around 150 outfits were displayed in total. The official curator was Caroline de Guitaut, Senior Curator of Decorative Arts at the Royal Collection Trust. Her name appears in the institutional record, the press releases, and the press preview photographs. But what dominated the contemporary section of the exhibition, the Jubilee ensembles, the Olympic ceremony dress, the royal wedding outfit, the hats, were Kelly's designs. The review in London Visitors described the famous Angela Kelly dress from the 2012 Olympic Games opening ceremony as a centerpiece. The same garments, Kelly's garments, traveled all 3 venues as the primary artifacts of a living reign. The coronation gown was Hartnell's. The Queen's public silhouette for the last 2 decades of her reign was Kelly's. Whatever the institutional architecture said about formal custodianship, the person with the deepest knowledge of what was in that archive, what it meant, and how it should be presented to the world wasn't a formally credentialed curator. She was the senior dresser from Walton. Daisy Goodwin, the historian and writer who spent years researching Kelly's role for her play By Royal Appointment, put it plainly in Tatler. Everything was arranged through Angela in those last years, a total gatekeeper. Everything in this next section comes from Kelly's own authorized account. That caveat matters, and it's stated once. Kelly's memoirs are self-report, written with the Queen's blessing. Where she is the source, she is named as such. The shoe practice is where the story begins, and it captures something exact about the nature of the relationship. The Queen couldn't break in her own shoes. She had too many public appearances where even a small discomfort would show. Kelly shared her shoe size, so Kelly wore them, not ceremonially, not symbolically, but practically, walking the carpeted corridors of the palace in the Queen's new pairs until they yielded. A servant's feet in a sovereign's shoes. Nobody in the household's chain of command had arranged this. It became the way things worked. The mornings had a rhythm. Kelly describes in her memoir the Queen beginning each day listening to the Terry Wogan Show on Radio 2. When ABBA's Dancing Queen came on, the Queen would move from side to side and sing along. Kelly, by her own account, got carried away and was dancing all round her like she was at a disco, until the Queen told her to move over. They were moments to cherish, Kelly told Vanity Fair in a rare interview, to see the Queen so relaxed. There were pranks. In Australia in 2008, the Queen had warned Kelly they would see kookaburras. When they didn't, Kelly bought a stuffed toy kookaburra and placed it in a cage in the Queen's bedroom. The Queen, alarmed, reached for it, at which point Kelly told her it was dead. The Queen picked it up, realized it was a toy, and told her, "You're sacked." Kelly describes other humor throughout the book, though her reviewer at Etiqueteer noted carefully that Kelly constantly reminds the reader that some things can't be told. She set her own limits. And then there is the hidden shamrock. Kelly recorded in her memoir a detail that is both small and precise. That hidden inside a garment worn by the Queen was a small shamrock, stitched where no one in a room could see it. The Queen's response when asked about it was simply, "Only for luck." Those 3 words are the emblem of a private language that existed between these two women for nearly 3 decades. Not in speeches or official communiques, in fabric. The jewelry protocol extended the same logic. The diamonds in the royal collection were cleaned, Kelly recounts, with a mixture of gin and water. The Queen apparently enjoyed finding bargains. Kelly describes shopping the bargain bucket at the Queen's own request. During the COVID-19 lockdown of 2020 and 2021, when the Queen moved to Windsor Castle with a small household staff, the HMS Bubble, as the master of the household memorably called it in a memorandum to his team, Kelly was among those who stayed inside. With no professional hairdresser available, Kelly cut and set the Queen's hair, a task she described as one that terrified her. She stayed by the Queen's side through the Duke of Edinburgh's death in April 2021, and through the Platinum Jubilee preparations of 2022. She was present at the end. The banter and mischief continued until Balmoral, Kelly told Vanity Fair. When the Queen passed away, she was surrounded by her family. It was a shock to the nation, to everyone. It was very sad, but it was an honor to serve the Queen until the very end. A former senior aide, speaking anonymously to Vanity Fair, offered a different frame on the same relationship. Angela crossed a line. She was technically a servant, but she was so much more than that. She became a confidant and a trusted member of the Queen's inner circle. People felt threatened by Angela, who could be ruthless, and that went right to the top. Private secretaries fell foul of Angela. She could make or break your palace career, because she had the Queen's ear. The royal household requires every member of staff to sign what its own documentation calls a deed, a formal, legally binding undertaking of confidentiality. The document covers everything. Any information, incident, or conversation that an employee learns by virtue of their work is confidential information under the deed. The prohibition is total in scope. No interviews, no statements, no photographs, no articles, no books, no memoirs, without authorization. Staff are required to report any approach from the press or any inducement to breach the deed directly to the communications secretary. Diaries and notes may only be kept for the purpose of carrying out the role and must be returned or destroyed on leaving. The deed applies during employment and after it. It survives the signatory's death. The legal backing is real and documented. In 1983, the Crown obtained a high court injunction against a former household employee. As the Attorney General confirmed to Parliament in February 1996, proceedings could be brought on behalf of the Queen in her private capacity to enforce her private law rights against employees or former employees who breached the duty of confidence. Attempting to subvert such an injunction would constitute criminal contempt of court. The household's most trusted legal instrument wasn't simply a culture or a tradition. It was a deed, a legally binding document with civil remedies including damages and, in the event of a book, the assignment of any profits to the Crown. The legal instrument sat on top of something older and less formal, a culture of silence so complete that for most of royal history, servants didn't need to be threatened with consequences. They had been trained into the expectation that disappearing into the institution was the job. To be noticed was a kind of failure. To be remembered by the public was a form of disloyalty. The household's unwritten rules, passed from one generation of staff to the next, reinforced what the deed formalized. What the code actually meant in practice, and where it could be broken, is illustrated by 3 cases, in ascending order of consequence. Marion Crawford was governess to Princesses Elizabeth and Margaret from 1933. She published The Little Princesses in 1950, a warmly written account of her years with the royal family. The palace's response was swift and permanent. She was ostracized completely. Christmas cards were returned unopened. No member of the family ever spoke to her again. There was no legal action, because the legal architecture of the confidentiality deed as it now exists wasn't yet formalized. The punishment was social, and it was total. Crawford spent the rest of her life in professional obscurity. The lesson passed down through the household wasn't legal, it was cultural. You didn't speak, you disappeared. And if you spoke, you were the one who disappeared. Dicky Arbiter served as Buckingham Palace press secretary from 1988 to 2000. He published a memoir in 2014. Press reports at the time described Prince Charles as furious. Arbiter acknowledged publicly that he had signed a confidentiality agreement, but maintained his book didn't breach it. No legal action followed. He had found, as Burrell would on different grounds, a gap in the enforcement mechanism. Paul Burrell is the canonical case. Former footman to Queen Elizabeth II, later butler to Diana, Princess of Wales, he published A Royal Duty in 2003, a memoir that described his career in intimate detail and serialized Diana's private correspondence. Buckingham Palace sought urgent legal advice from its solicitors, Ferrer & Co. The conclusion was damaging to the palace. Burrell and his publisher, Penguin, were unlikely to be in breach of the law. The specific way the correspondence had been quoted made copyright action difficult to win in court. The palace acknowledged it was effectively powerless. No legal action was taken. Princes William and Harry issued a joint statement through Clarence House. They called the book a cold and overt betrayal. They said the revelations would have mortified their mother, and accused Burrell of abusing his position of trust. The book sold more than 500,000 copies. Burrell reportedly earned at least £2 million and became a television personality. The palace got nothing. The silence code was real. The legal enforcement was real. The deed existed. The injunction precedent existed. And Burrell had found a gap in the mechanism anyway, and the palace had been unable to close it after the fact. The court could compel compliance before publication, in some circumstances. It apparently couldn't compel recovery of profits from a book already sold. None of them had the one thing that changed everything. None of them had permission. HarperCollins, announcing the acquisition of The Other Side of the Coin in September 2019, was precise about what that meant. The Queen has personally given Angela her blessing to share their unparalleled bond with the world. Angela Kelly is the first serving member of the royal household to have been given this extraordinary permission. The book was marketed as the official book, fully endorsed by Queen Elizabeth II. The 2 books are different in kind from each other, and the difference matters. Dressing the Queen, The Jubilee Wardrobe, published by the Royal Collection Trust in November 2012, can be substantially explained as institutional PR. It was a Diamond Jubilee commemorative publication, glossy, beautifully illustrated, 144 pages, focused on the design process and the behind-the-scenes logistics of the Jubilee wardrobe. A palace spokesperson described it at the time as just a book about dresses. The profits went to charity. The Royal Collection Trust, not a commercial trade publisher, held the rights. Its introductory pages were written by Samantha Cohen, then Assistant Private Secretary to the Queen. It was less a personal memoir than a sanctioned account of professional craft. It was still extraordinary by the standards of royal household publishing. But the 2019 book was a different thing entirely. The Other Side of the Coin, The Queen, The Dresser and the Wardrobe, was published by HarperCollins on October 29, 2019. Literary agent Elizabeth Schenkman at Peters, Fraser and Dunlop negotiated world rights. The editorial director was Katja Schipster at Harper Nonfiction. Kelly read the audiobook herself. The book contained private photographs from Kelly's own collection, candid images from tours, from private moments, from the wardrobe floor. It contained the shoe-breaking practice, the Yorkshire tea christening gown, the hidden shamrock and its two-word gloss, the gin and water diamond cleaning, the ABBA morning dancing, the kookaburra prank in Australia. None of these things had been in the public record before. The Platinum Jubilee edition, published in May 2022, added material on the COVID lockdown at Windsor, Prince Philip's funeral, and the final preparations for the Jubilee celebrations, the period when Kelly had cut and set the Queen's hair and remained at her side through the most isolated months of her final years. The question that both books generate: why did Elizabeth II, who let no one speak, let this one woman speak, has no clean answer in the public record. The Queen never explained herself on this, or on much else. What exists is Kelly's own account of her uncertainty, her sense of the weight of the permission. Writing in the 2019 book, she said, "When I first asked the Queen if she would mind me writing another book, I never thought in my wildest dreams that Her Majesty would say yes. Once the initial shock was over, I found myself struggling. The Queen trusts me, and she knows I wouldn't write any intimate details or anything untoward about our friendship and working relationship. But, nevertheless, I still struggled. I wanted to do this book justice. I wanted to be worthy of writing it." That passage is the closest we get. The permission was granted because Kelly had demonstrated, over nearly 3 decades, that she understood exactly where the line was. Her book contains the phrase, noted by her reviewer at Etiqueteer, that "some things can't be told." Kelly wrote that herself, in a book licensed by the very person who determined what those things were. The trust wasn't unconditional. It was precisely conditional, and Kelly honored the condition. The permission was bounded. That restraint is itself the proof of the relationship. On June 17, 2006, Angela Kelly was appointed a member of the Royal Victorian Order, MVO, confirmed via the London Gazette. On September 13, 2012, she was promoted to Lieutenant of the Royal Victorian Order, LVO, again confirmed in the Gazette. The Royal Victorian Order is the sovereign's personal gift, awarded for service to the monarch and the royal family. It isn't granted by the government. It isn't subject to prime ministerial advice. It comes from the Crown alone. Both confirmations are in the public record. Her institutional recognition was unambiguous. So was the friction it generated. The resentment of courtiers is documented largely in press reports, which must be taken as press-sourced and unconfirmed. A 2014 Daily Mail piece described what it characterized as a mutiny below stairs, the thesis being that Kelly's growing influence had alienated long-serving staff, concentrated too much authority in the hands of a woman who had arrived through the servants' entrance rather than the formal household hierarchy. The nickname reportedly given to her by palace staff, referencing an assault rifle on account of her alleged ability to remove people from the Queen's orbit, appears in that and subsequent press coverage, including in Kelly's own 2019 memoir, where she is reported to take it as a compliment. The sources for this are tabloid and society press. No palace spokesperson has confirmed it, and it should be taken as exactly what it is: press reporting about private tensions that the institution never publicly acknowledged. What is confirmed, by Kelly's own account and independent reporting, is the dispute before Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's wedding in May 2018. Kelly declined to allow a chosen tiara to leave the palace for a pre-wedding hairdresser appointment. Harry, in his 2023 memoir Spare, described Kelly as obstructive and a troublemaker. Kelly never responded publicly to Harry's account. A palace source told Vanity Fair that the Queen ultimately intervened, telling Harry that the tiara couldn't leave and that she would deal with him. Kelly, the same source said, was in tears and went to the Queen saying she couldn't take it anymore. Whatever the geometry of that dispute, it illustrated exactly what the anonymous former aide had described, that Kelly's position was one in which she could make or break your palace career because she had the Queen's ear. That applied to private secretaries and, it turned out, to princes. Queen Elizabeth II died at Balmoral Castle on September 8, 2022. Kelly was among the small household staff in Scotland that summer. Kelly dressed the Queen for her final journey to Windsor. On September 19th, the day of the state funeral, Kelly described it on Instagram as, "A very sad day for me today. I said goodbye to my best friend." She was among the household staff who attended the service at Westminster Abbey. After that, the confirmed facts thin out rapidly. What is confirmed? Kelly attended the funeral. In March 2023, she was appointed Commander of the Royal Victorian Order, CVO, a higher grade than the LVO she had previously held, in the honors list marking the Queen's death. Her role within the royal household ended with the Queen's death. The Queen Consort, now Queen Camilla, had her own dresser. There was no equivalent position for Kelly in the new reign. What press reports describe, and this must be taken as press-sourced and unverified, is a more complicated picture. The Daily Mail reported in April 2023 that Kelly had been asked to vacate her Grace and Favour cottage on the Windsor estate, and that within days of the Queen's death, the locks on the cupboards to which she had held keys had been changed. Kelly confirmed on Instagram that she was moving to the Peak District, describing herself as getting ready to say goodbye, and noting her work phone had been disconnected. "I am too old to worry about who likes me and who dislikes me," she posted. "I have more important things to do." The Daily Express reported in May 2023, citing friends of Kelly, that the late Queen had given her written consent to publish up to 3 books. Only 2 have appeared, and that Kelly had signed a non-disclosure agreement with King Charles III in exchange for accommodation near Sheffield. Neither the palace nor Kelly has confirmed the existence or terms of any such agreement, and both claims must be treated as contested press reporting. Whether press reports characterizing Charles as dismayed that the Queen had allowed Kelly to publish books accurately reflect the King's view can't be verified. What isn't contested is the structural logic. The confidentiality deed that bound Kelly, as it bound every household employee, had been suspended in her case by the only person with the authority to suspend it. That authority died with the Queen. Whatever Kelly carries forward, the private photographs still undeveloped, the conversations still unwritten, the reported letter granting permission for a 3rd book, the mechanism that produced the first 2 books depended entirely on a sovereign who is no longer alive to grant it. The distinction that runs through all of it's the difference between knowledge and permission. Every butler, every page, every former dresser who came before Kelly had knowledge. They had seen things, heard things, learned the texture of private life inside the most guarded household in Britain. None of them had permission. When Burrell published without it, William and Harry called it a cold and overt betrayal, and the legal apparatus swung at him and missed because of a technicality. When Crawford published without it in 1950, she was cut off forever. When Arbiter published in 2014, press reports suggested royal fury and nothing more. Kelly's permission didn't come because she was the most talented person in the household, though the christening gown and the Jubilee wardrobe suggest she was extraordinarily skilled at her work. It didn't come because she had accumulated leverage, though by the end she had accumulated considerable informal power. It came, as best the evidence can tell us, because she had spent nearly 3 decades demonstrating that she understood exactly where the line was. Her book says so. The publisher's endorsement says so. The fact that the books don't contain what they could contain, the most intimate photographs not published, The family dynamics not transcribed, the private arguments not narrated, says so. The etiquetteer reviewer, reading the 2019 book carefully, noted that Kelly constantly reminds the reader that some things can't be told. That phrase is the key to the entire arc. The permission to speak was granted because the woman receiving it had proved, over decades, that she knew what silence meant. Here is the line from beginning to end in its simplest form. November 1957. A council house in Walton, Liverpool. A dockworker's daughter. A nurse's sewing lessons. October 1992. A meeting at the British ambassador's residence in Berlin with the Queen of England. 1994. Assistant dresser at Buckingham Palace. The bottom of the servant hierarchy. By 2001, the Queen's first ever formally designated personal assistant, a title the household had no precedent for. By 2008, the woman who led the fabrication of the replica christening gown, now worn at every royal baptism, traveling to Italy with the original gown in her handbag and dyeing the lace in a kitchen bowl with Yorkshire tea. By 2012, the designer of record for the Diamond Jubilee wardrobe, the ivory boucle coat on the Thames, the gold lame concert dress, the pale turquoise ensemble at St. Paul's, and the author of the first publicly authorized account of the wardrobe's making, published by the Royal Collection Trust. By 2019, the first serving member of the royal household in history to publish a memoir with the sovereign's explicit personal blessing, with HarperCollins holding world rights. By the end, we both knew we had trust, loyalty, and understanding. The Queen was my best friend, and I miss her every day. Palace staff were hired to disappear. Angela Kelly did the opposite. She became irreplaceable. The butlers took the secrets to the grave. Kelly kept a language and was permitted twice to tell the world it existed. The coronation gown sits in its climate-controlled vault beneath the palace. The christening gown replica, dyed in a dresser's kitchen by a woman who once sold her washing machine to afford an interview outfit, travels to fonts where the next generation of the royal family is baptized. The wardrobe rooms at Windsor and Buckingham Palace reportedly have new locks now. And somewhere north of Sheffield, there is a docker's daughter from Liverpool who held the keys to the only sentences Elizabeth II ever wrote, and who, twice, with permission, told the world they existed. She was never just staff. She was the keeper of a language. And the most extraordinary thing about the story isn't the 30 years inside the palace, or the christening gown, or the Jubilee coat, or the hidden shamrock with its 3 quiet words. It's that when the time came, she knew what not to say.